Part 3. Australia. Alex had caught an hour or two of sleep on the team's journey to Australia. They barely had a day's worth of time to infiltrate Baruger's base, but Alex felt there was more than that at stake. There was something there that Newsom's ghost wanted him to find, and he didn't have the slightest idea what it could be. Identified craft. This is Commander Elkin. You're late. Alex pushed down a button on the control board. And I'll waste more time talking to you. What do you want? We need you to land in Sydney for a sit-rep. You'll never make it into that base without its location, so unless you feel like flying around the outback for a few hours. Alex shook his head. Australia just wanted to swing its stealthy dick around, probably at the ambassador's request, but he knew he didn't have a choice. Give me a landing site. Transmitting now. Within a few moments, Alex had set the hellchopper down within the confines of an old military college. As he exited the hellchopper, he looked around at the impressive old architecture littered with new fortifications. It looked as if Australia had been prepared for a war within its own country, though for how long Alex could only guess. The team was greeted by a formal brigade in the dead of night. At the head, a man dressed in gear like what Nyala Hargraven had worn, a simple vest and bandolier, black fatigues, boots, and an undershirt. Alexander Velasco. I'm General Cale Woodson. I'm pleased to finally meet you. I wish I could say the feeling was mutual, General, but I'm not here of my own free will. Woodson nodded and pointed towards the building. Alex followed him with his team, and Woodson's brigade in tow. Lawson wouldn't have been my choice as ambassador, saying as he also runs the country. The man is a real politico from the old world. Even setting up this meeting was his idea. I suppose that's one way to describe him, Alex replied. The long hall they were in led to a large room with multiple doorways and brown wood paneling adorned with portraits. Alex assumed they were former soldiers or members of the military, but didn't bother to ask. Woodson led him to the room at the end of the building, but stopped short of the door. I'd prefer it if we spoke alone, the general said. Alex looked back at his team and held up a hand, and then followed Woodson into his office. Care for a drink? Woodson asked. Alex looked over at Woodson's extensive liquor cabinet. Most of the bottles were nearly full, which, to Alex, meant that Woodson was either an alcoholic that didn't mind showing it, or he didn't drink. Yeah, whatever you're having. Whiskey, then. Please, have a seat. Alex took a chair opposite of the massive desk that was bare save for a few shifted pieces of paper. Woodson set Alex's drink down in front of him, and then sat down himself. I need to be frank with you, Alex. The base Lawson told you about, it's a lie. Alex tilted his head to the side. It's a research facility, not a military base, and it hosts a platoon of Baruga's men. At the time, before the war that is, we were happy to allow the Germans to do what they do with science. They and you Americans saved us after all. And now you want it gone, Alex replied. With good reason. We've been involved in conflict for nearly a year, shortly after your team killed John Morrison. What kind of conflict? Why hasn't this been brought up during council meetings? Alex asked as he watched Woodson take a sip from his drink. For that, you need a little backstory. After Morrison's assassination, my people began to go missing. Civilians to start. It wasn't a substantial number until we began noticing it in our ranks. A ranger would go missing, then a scout. Somehow we couldn't account for them. Fast forward a month later and it stops. After an official investigation, we labeled the prisoners and civilians as MIA. Full disclosure, we thought it might have been your people. Until you did the math, Alex said. Woodson nodded. Your Crusaders and Sentinels have never operated small scale. It was out of character. We also accounted for your disappearance in California. You know about that? Alex, please. It's our business to know. Now, the month after our soldiers disappeared, citizens began missing and then reappearing. Then came the terrorist attacks. Public transit locations began exploding. Men and women with rifles opening fire in marketplaces with no regard for their own safety. They all had one thing in common. They were the same people who had gone missing, and all with the same skill set as the MIA Rangers. We've engaged with them a few times in the city, but have only managed to kill 2 of them. All others escaped. Allow me to remind you that Rangers do not miss. We've hit them, but they didn't go down. Alex reached for his drink and slugged it down in one go. Baruger turned them into augmented terrorists. This isn't a homegrown revolution. Has he reached out with demands? Politically, he claims it's a sect of your people stirring the pot. He's offered aid in exchange for our vote, but all that means is the attacks stop until he wants something else from us. So, The base must be destroyed. While Woodson explained, Alex put a smoke in his mouth and went to light it. You don't mind, do you? Woodson shook his head. I'm sure I don't have to remind you that I'm sure it will kill you one day. Alex lit up the smoke and took a long drag. He exhaled towards the ceiling. There are plenty of other deadly things out there that'll get me before cancer. So what do you need from my team and I? This is purely strategic. Our own people could destroy that base, but we've been maneuvering troops away from it for months now. We have them focusing on attack prevention, making it look like we have no idea what's going on and are in damage control mode. This opens the door for you and your team. Alex shook his head. Giving you a scapegoat. You lose your terrorists and can blame us if there's any evidence that it wasn't a malfunction at the base. Woodson smiled. Or we blame the terrorists. Say they're a pro-council separatist group, which in no way relates to your team. And where is this base? Right here, in the heart of Sydney. Oh, for fuck's sake, Woodson. Alex put a palm to his face. This is either the most obvious setup of all time, or you're working directly with Beruger. Which is it? Woodson's smile faded away. The man leaned his elbows on his desk and stared at Alex. You know how difficult it is to navigate the political bullshit, Alex, but you can't avoid it. So you have a choice. Help us and risk becoming exposed but gain our vote, or walk away and lose it entirely. You have a chance to get what you want. Can you just walk away from that? It almost seems like the right choice. If I wait it out, soon your people will have to bring this to the council. And how would that look? The spy masters of the New World infiltrated by Berlin, so much so that they can't defend themselves against sabotage. At that point, I'd have your vote anyway, Alex replied. We're thus severely weakened, and of no help to you in your final push against Beruger. How long do you want to fight that battle of attrition against an enemy that never tires, and is making more soldiers of civilians in who knows how many countries and dead zones? Woodson asked. Alex had only smoked half a cigarette, but threw the still smoldering butt on Woodson's floor and stood up. One day, you people are going to realize that the politics you play hamstrings progress. You'll never get what you ultimately need, and instead be stuck playing an endless shell game with pawns the rest of the world calls human lives, Alex said as he made for the door. Send us your goddamn coordinates. We'll clean up this fucking mess. Alex's team fell in with him on their way to the Hellchopper. They didn't ask him anything, and he didn't have anything to offer them. He spun up the bird and made for the coordinates transmitted to him from the Ranger base. Beruger leading a rebellion in Australia made sense. He wanted to distract Alex, keep him away from the council in Jerusalem. He wanted to use his need to fight against him. Unfortunately for Beruger, Alex didn't give a fuck about the scientist's plan or the council. Woodson had been correct. The base was located several miles away from the Ranger HQ. There were no missile sites, no soldiers. In fact, there seemed to be nothing remarkable about the building at all. It was like a massive rectangle, almost shaped like an iron ingot. There were no windows, and the only visible entrance was a single door and a loading bay. Alex circled around a few times, looking for a rooftop entrance, but there wasn't even a landing pad. Looks like no building I've ever seen, Keller said aloud. Seems like a trap, Alex. One way in, one way out. I don't like those odds, Vixer said. Alex thought for a moment as he swung the bird around again. Shayla, you know flight protocols. Does New Purgatory still have flight clearance in Australia? Apart from this unsanctioned mission? No, but... Shaylee paused and her eyes lit up. They were never reinstated after the treaty was signed. So technically the only birds allowed in the air are from here, Berlin, and Jerusalem, right? Alex asked. What are you thinking? Keller asked. I'm thinking that politics just caused an international incident, Alex replied. He flipped a switch on his flight stick and slammed down on a button. 2 missiles streaked off into the night and exploded at the building's entrance. Rock and rubble went flying, and when the smoke cleared, there was a sizable hole and a lot of bodies. Jesus Christ, Shayla yelled. What did you do? He bent the rules, Vixer replied. If we're going in there, we better do it now. Alex set the bird down on the road near the base. The area was quiet apart from the crackling of fire and crumbling of rubble. The research facility seemed like it was on its own island, even though it was in the middle of a city. Buildings surrounded it on all sides, but spaced out by yards upon yards of asphalt road. Alex drew his rifle and motioned for the team to join him. Watch your footing, Vixer said aloud. I don't want to have to carry any of you home. Alex moved ahead. The stench of burning flesh and office supplies hit his nostrils, but was easy to ignore. He looked around the entrance. Smoldering bodies, but none dressed in military attire. No reinforcements on the way, no alarms. Now he was curious. If this was a research facility, he wondered what was being experimented on. He looked around for maps, or anything that would give him a sense of direction once he was inside the building. "Now that we're in, I recognize the floor plan," Keller said aloud. "Outside might be different, but I'll bet the layout is the same. Main labs in either the top floor or basement. Everything else is small-time projects." "Then you and Ferris take the basement. Keeley and I will handle the top floor," Alex ordered. Shaley looked cross, and Alex knew why, and it wasn't because of Keller. Keller and Ferris made their way down a hall leading towards a set of stairs where they were met with a pair of soldiers. Shaley fired twice down the stairs, nailing one of them. Keller saw him fall. "They're not augmented," he said before spinning and rushing down the stairs. The other soldier was already raising his rifle, but Keller crashed into him, his short blade drawn, and drove it into the soldier's chest. Keller followed the man to the ground. The soldier was dead before then, but Hollis stayed on top of him and looked around. No other soldiers in sight. Shaley made her way downstairs and rushed over to Hollis to help him up. Keller batted her hand away. "Take a look at this," he said, pointing to the insignia on the man's chest. Shaley kneeled to get a better look and flashed the light from her pistol down on the fallen man. "Shit, that's a ranger insignia. Why the hell would rangers attack us? Why here?" she asked. Keller shook his head and stood back up. "Better question is why they staffed this place with the skeleton crew. Might have been expecting an attack. Either that or most of the work was automated after a time. Can never tell with these fucking people." "And the rangers?" "If they were rangers, they weren't trained right. No, something else is going on here. I've fought real rangers before. Anyone is lucky to make it out of a fight with them alive. These guys were pretenders, or worse," Keller replied. The two continued down the new corridor, their weapons raised. "You seem to know a bit about places like this." "And the rangers," Shaley said. "Comes with being a killer for hire. A lot of people think you're there for a job, but it pays to memorize doors, exits, key spots. When you're doing that, you tend to notice other shit. There's a research facility in Berlin set up just like this one. More people, though." "So you did other work for Beruger?" Shaley asked. "Yeah. Simple jobs, until that business in New Purgatory. That was the first time I met him." "How'd that go?" Hollis Keller had been to Berlin before, but never the interior city. Old and New Berlin was separated by where the Cloudbreaker reactor had shielded the city and where it had not. The untrained eye couldn't see the difference, as Berlin had rebuilt in short order, but it was in the details. Hollis always paid attention to the details. It was the difference between life and death on his chosen path. New glass, new walls, but little to no people living in the new buildings. People all wanted to live within the reactor's barrier, not outside of it. If it meant foregoing the amenities of a rebuilt city, they lived with that. Survival was king, even in the few civilized parts of the world that remained. Keller wasn't here to debate survival, or the human condition in his own head, though. This time he was here to meet the man who'd saved the city, Thomas Beruger, the good doctor, scientist, visionary, and whatever else the people of this city in New Purgatory wanted to label him. A group of soldiers had ferried in Keller on a cargo transport. Most were silent. There was no discussion between them. It wasn't like any squad he had ever been in. Usually one guy would be a loudmouth, or asking questions, maybe a rookie, who was too hopped up on nerves to know any better, or an arrogant vet that had been lucky enough to dodge a few bullets. In this group, the sound of wind and tires rolling on the pavement equated to banter. It would have been fine for Hollis, were the soldiers he was surrounded by not so deadly serious. They pulled up to a bland-looking facility with no windows, loading bays, or parking lot. Just a lone door hidden in the shadowed part of the building. The soldier that drove turned to Hollis and uttered his first words of the journey. "Head in. The receptionist will take you to the professor." His English was hard to understand, heavily accented by his German heritage, but Hollis just gave the soldier a nod, exited the truck, and went inside the building. By contrast to the soldiers outside, the receptionist was bright and bubbly. "Welcome, Mr. Keller. I'll take you to your appointment with Dr. Beruger." "Sure thing." "Excellent. The doctor has been looking forward to meeting you in person. Right this way." Hollis did as he was told. The receptionist was shapely, but most of it was hidden under her pantsuit. She was on the younger side of 30 at least, and her English was either a first language or well practiced. She wouldn't survive a week out in the wastes, he thought. I understand you've worked with Thomas before? She asked as they moved past the illuminated white walls of a long stretch of hallway. They turned every so often. It wasn't designed to be easy to navigate, but there was plenty of cover. The side rooms they passed looked like they led to nowhere. Not only defensive, but also a maze. Mr. Keller? Once or twice. He's always seemed intent on working through intermediaries. Ah, well, you are in for a treat. You do know Dr. Baruga helped invent the Cloudbreaker reactors, yes? You don't say, Keller replied snidely. The receptionist didn't say anything after that. She couldn't be so stupid as to think she wasn't talking to a hired killer. Of course, Hollis wondered if she had only dealt with dignitaries and other scientists. The scars on my face and dusted fatigue should be a clue, he thought. After a series of more endless hallways and empty rooms, they came across an elevator. You'll take this down and meet the man below. He will take you to the professor. When you have concluded your meeting, I will await you here. You sure I can't persuade you to take a ride with me? Maybe stop on every floor on the way down. The woman tilted her head at him, then blushed, but tried to hide it behind the new bass in her voice. I don't think that would be recommended. She spun on her heel as the elevator door closed. Hollis laughed to himself as the elevator began to move. Like every other part of the building, it was sterile and white. There were no smells, like it was always meticulously cleaned, compared to the waste where roasted animal flesh on a stick and the shit smell of decomposition flooded the nostrils. When the elevator stopped, Hollis was greeted by an older man with eyes made of gold. He looked as weathered as Keller, but much older. He wore a black skin suit. There was a scabbard on his boot, but it was empty, and there was a pistol at his waist. Well, Hollis said aloud. The man spun around quickly, catching Hollis off guard. The gold of his eyes shuddered, the iris enclosing around the irregular white pupil, and then opening again. That's a new one, Hollis said. Come with me, the man said. Again, Hollis followed someone, but this time the path was a straight shot to a large door. When Hollis entered, he wasn't sure he was even in the same building. The room was circular, with a full display of buildings around it, along with meadows and grass. This must be the heart of the city. But how the hell did I get here? He thought. In the center of the room sat a man in a wheelchair. Unceremoniously, the old weathered soldier took his leave without saying another word to Keller. When the bounty hunter looked back, the man was gone. Hollis Keller, I'd stand and shake your hand, but I'm a bit busy now. If you would come over here, please. It was more an order than a request. Keller was used to that. There were many that viewed him as nothing more than a means to an end, a tool. Keller approached, taking in the room around him. It looked more like a command center located inside of an aviary instead of a laboratory. Hollis knew then that Baruger was the real power in Berlin, not the suits. The doctor was tapping away at his computer terminal. He never even looked at Keller. So what is it you need from me? 2 things. The first is that I'm rather locked down on the movements I can make from my birdcage here, and the laws of the land dictate that there be a ceasefire in place. Therefore, I have asked you to join me here today, Hollis. You need an intermediary, Hollis replied. Something like that. Partner might even be a better word if that encourages you to take the job. Since I or my soldiers cannot directly intervene in any conflict, I'd like you to conscript a group of raiders outside of New Purgatory. Conscript them, and then begin raiding the outposts, stealing supplies, attacking civilian convoys. Hollis shrugged his shoulders. To what end? To harass my enemies when I can't be seen doing it. To test their mettle and their ability to rule, and to draw out their leaders so they might be destroyed. Specifically, Janet Treshella and the rest of her sentinel ilk. Dead or alive. If you fulfill that, you'll receive a considerable bonus. You expect them to come outside and stop raider attacks on their own? They'll have an army. I doubt they do much grunt work anymore. They will when they see what your raider group is attacking them with. I'll provide you with several crates of unmarked weapons, grenade launchers, high-caliber rifles, ammunition, and explosives. What you do with them is truly up to you and your nature. Hollis thought about that for a moment. He'd heard of the goings-on with the war between Berlin and New Purgatory. As far as he knew, they were allies once, until John Morrison was killed by the same people Beruger was asking him to bring in. Not to insult you, but I'm not an assassin. Buildings and convoys I can destroy. If multiple people need to have an accident, that's fine. But your steward who led me in here looks more suited to what you're asking of me. Assassination and bounty hunting are the same. One simply prefers to take the reward for their targets being dead. But to sate your curiosity, it is a matter of preference and sense. Mikhail, my steward, as you put it, is skilled, but lacks a certain sense of detachment. And his skills are ingrained. Unteachable, you might say. Whereas you are certainly able to teach someone how to hold a weapon the right way. Mikhail would also prefer the targets dead and isn't influenced by currency. You would get a hefty bonus if my targets were brought in alive. These folks are the ones that killed John Morrison, Hollis noted. Yes, as I'm sure you learned in your undercover work at the bar. A man named Velasco is, or was, the leader of a group called the Crusaders, or Sentinels, or whatever the name is now. Tershella fancies herself a general. She leads the day-to-day operations of New Purgatory. She's a strong leader, but cutting the head off the snake should suffice in that regard. Putting down or capturing revolutionaries isn't usually what I do. They're too ready to make themselves into martyrs, and that means taking a lot of people with them, Hollis said. You don't mean to tell me you're going to turn down this offer? Beruger asked. Keller shook his head. I'll lead a band of raiders, no problem. Hell, we'll even cause quite the ruckus that might lure them out. And if they fall into my sights, I'll try to capture them. Prefer not to contract myself out, where bringing them in alive has got to be mandatory. I find that more than fair, Mr. Keller. What about Velasco? You never mentioned the need to capture or kill him in all this. Beruger stopped typing for the first time in their conversation and turned his chair around to face the bounty hunter. There was nothing intimidating about the paunchy German, though Keller had heard the rumors about his lust for power. Beruger looked more akin to an old grandfather that enjoyed whittling wood than plotting the demise of a country or the death of a person. Velasco is an interesting situation, but my informants haven't seen him in months. There is a belief that he fled New Purgatory. That's a strong assumption. Why? Hollis asked. His lover was recently murdered in our attack on the city. He was already of frail mind after losing so many in the attack on Morrison's tower. And despite what you might see in the news, he and his sentinels were behind what happened in Beijing, where he lost more of his people. Perhaps that final attack is what broke him. He is no longer a worry of mine. Keller didn't like the response, but kept his emotions off his face. Either Beruger knew more than he was letting on, or the man was convinced that he had finally squashed an old enemy. Keller couldn't tell what was worse. Going to need more information on Velasco. It'll be key to understanding who he was and who he surrounded himself with. I need to understand him to understand his people, why they followed him, what they're capable of. Any data I have is yours, of course. Also want details on the pay. Beruger swung back around to his desk and computer. Whatever you wish. Money, weapons, a counselor's seat when New Purgatory falls back in line with the correct ideals. I don't care, because all three are well within my means. If you bring me Velasco's associates, you will have a blank check. So that's what this is all about, Keller thought. As you like. With that, Keller turned on his heel and left. Turns out it was less an elevator and more of a bullet train. The inertia was all off, Hollis explained. And that's the last time you saw him? Yeah, it was. He either thinks I'm dead or gave up on the job. I'm sure my old raider base is wiped clean by now. Shaley shook her head. Why didn't you just take Alex to Beruger? Hollis thought about that while he tried to remember the original path to the elevator at the German base. There were plenty of empty rooms, just as it had been in Germany, but medical supplies replaced the empty white tables. Didn't feel like it, Keller replied. Yeah? You sound like you don't believe that. You wanted to help him, didn't you? Beruger lied to me that day. Made it sound like Alex was already dead and gone. At least your man has never lied about what we're up against. Besides, after walking through Beruger's base, walking through places like this. It makes it seem like Baruger is a man you don't say no to. He won't let you. I've seen the shit he does to his own people, to people against their will. Even I can't sit on my hands about that." Before Shaylee could respond, Keller stopped her. "This is it. Should take us where we need to go." Alex and Keeley fought their way up the stairs. When one would fire, the other one would reload, and so on. It got to the point for Alex where it felt like old times. Nothing could stop him. He was a rebel shooting his way through New Purgatory with Layla at his side. But this wasn't New Purgatory, and Keeley Vixer wasn't Layla. That truth came to a head when a bullet crashed into his arm. Alex cried out, but caught himself from falling down the stairs. It wasn't a graze. "Shit, I'm getting slow," he thought. Keeley cut her reload short and began firing up the stairwell. Alex ignored the wound and put a new clip into his rifle. "Alex?" Keeley yelled. I'm good. He stood back up and ran up the stairs to Keeley's surprise. These weren't Baruger's augmented soldiers, and they were worse than Morrison's Marines. Untrained, undisciplined, lazy in the face of real muscle. He saw the faces of 3 scared soldiers. They fired wildly. Alex held a breath, let it out, and fired 3 shots in quick succession. The soldiers went down, each a headshot, and then they were dead. Alex took in a sharp breath, exhaled, and set the butt of his rifle on the stair above him. The wound hurt, and he was out of breath. Keeley came up after him. Neither of them had noticed they were treading over other bodies of those they had killed. "You're sure you're all right?" she asked. "Yeah, nice little sting is all." "Sting my ass. Take off your coat." Alex did as she asked. He could feel blood running down his arm. Keeley looked at it a moment, then ripped off a part of the undershirt from her uniform and tied it around his arm. "You're lucky it didn't hit the bone. You wouldn't want to move right now. It went through clean, but not by much. Tore through the backside." The pair stayed there for a moment. Alex sat on the stairs and tried to catch his breath while Keeley hunched down in front of him. "Can I ask you something? Soldier to soldier. Rival to rival." Alex let out a laugh. "We haven't been rivals in a long time. Besides, you've never wanted my opinion on anything. I've always had to tell you what it is. That's bullshit. You listen more than any CO I've ever been under. But now I want to know something." "Okay," Alex said. Keeley grabbed him and helped him stand upright. Alex wanted to fight her off, but he didn't. It wouldn't be right. At least not right now. "You ran, I get that. But what was your plan? Were you going to come back? Did you just plan to die out in the wastes?" Alex put his back to the stairwell wall and slung his rifle strap behind his neck. He shook his head a couple times and then looked up at Keeley. "I wish it had been me that night, not Layla. To be honest with you, I had no plan. I didn't plan on coming back either. Why?" "Keeley, I haven't had a plan since John Morrison died. I wanted to stop him, but I never had any idea of what to do after he was dead. I don't know shit about rebuilding, about leading people that carry tools instead of guns. Layla and I came back because we felt like we had left everyone behind. We came back to do whatever we could to help, to learn something new. Instead, Baruger came along and tried to ruin the progress Janet had made. And he did it because of me. Because I tried to stop him from playing with soldiers and people and places like toys. He took away everything that mattered. He might not have the city, but he beat me. He won. I did everything I possibly could, played his game, was better at his game than he was, and I still lost. That's why I ran away. Janet might run the city, but you were our leader, Alex. In the face of that loss, we needed you. I'm not a figurehead, Keeley. I fought and got my friends killed too many times over. People died for me, but I'm still alive. I should have died when that tower went down. There would have been no Crusaders, no new war, just a pile of dead men and women under the tombstone of skyscraper-sized refuse. And Egypt and Japan wouldn't have been invited to the council. China would still be taking slaves, and I would be fighting for a cause I stopped believing in a long time ago," Keeley replied. "None of you needed me for that. Maybe not, but they did it because of you. We can't let you leave us now. Like it or not, you've become iconic to more people than you can ever imagine, both positively and negatively. So tell me what happened to you. Was it just Layla, or was it more?" Alex's head was down as Keeley spoke. When he finally lifted it, she could see the underside of his eyes, black from lack of sleep, and red on the sides as he fought to keep them from welling up. "Fuck," he said aloud. "I feel like I've lost it all. I can't figure out where my heart wants to direct me and where my head needs to go. Losing Layla crushed my spirit and my hope for a better future. I'm just an enforcer now. Like someone else oversees every promising idea I've had, and I'm just clearing away the roadblocks and bodies. I only have one goal now, ending Baruger, and this nightmare I created will end. If that's my downfall, then I accept it till I crash into the hell I'm destined to see." Keeley looked back at him, no words to say. "I doubt I'll get to speak to Janet much before the end of all this. You remember those words, and you tell her what I said. I don't care if she understands or not. If she doesn't today, she will eventually. That's the way of things. Do you understand?" Keeley nodded, but as Alex went to push off the wall, she stopped him and reached behind her back. "Here." She produced a black leather-bound journal, more weathered than Alex's new one, but similar in make. "What's this?" Alex asked. "Janet was given this by Layla some time before she passed. She gave it to her in case something happened. Janet wanted me to give it to you." Alex shook his head. "She never had a journal. She always used mine." Keeley shrugged. "That's just what Janet told me. Maybe she kept it from you for some reason." Alex took the journal and put it in his jacket pocket. He wasn't ready to read it. He wasn't ready to see if there were more answers than questions. "We need to keep moving," he said aloud. "Now isn't the time to reflect." The elevator ride was shorter than it had been in Berlin, and there was no shifting from side to side. Hollis wondered why the building was so unsecure. There were too few soldiers for a place like this. He could smell fear on Shaylee, the cold sweat running down her neck. It was a scent he was familiar with when hunting down marks. Hollis knew she was just a medic, but her fear wasn't of fighting. "What do you think is down here?" Shaylee asked. The elevator stopped and the doors opened. "One way to find out," Hollis replied. He stepped out with his rifle drawn. The entire room was dark, but encircled by dim green lights that ran along the floor. Hollis looked around for any sign of hanging lights, but could find none. "Hell. You see anything, Shaylee?" She followed behind him, using the floor lights as a visual guide. She stopped when her thighs bumped into a table. "Fuck!" she yelped, reaching for the flashlight on her rifle and turning it on. She shined it at the table, but what she saw hurt more than her thighs. There was a body, male. His face was missing, as was the top part of his skull. His eyes were bathing in a solution next to him, but worst of all, he was still breathing. An articulating medical arm went to work with a scalpel. Another replaced bits and pieces of skull with metal. Another still made injections of different colored fluids. "What in the unholy fuck is this?" Shaylee said. Hollis moved beside her and cringed from beyond Shaylee's vision, then used her light to shine on the man's outfit. Hollis recognized the symbols and badges immediately. "These are Rangers," Hollis said. "What the hell are Rangers doing on an operating table in a German base?" "They're being turned into the Augmented," Shaylee answered. "But is this by choice?" "I can't imagine anyone wanting this. He's still alive. Shine your light over there." Shaylee pointed her rifle up at other rows of tables. More Rangers and others half-dressed in civilian clothing. "There's the missing people," Hollis said. "Shit." Shaylee tapped the comm in her ear twice. "Alex, we found the missing people. They're being turned." Alex knew now that Woodson had been correct. Baruger was turning people in other countries to control them. It was the only possible explanation, either to use them as sleeper agents or to supplement his ever-growing army. "Keep me in the loop, Shaylee. See if you can find any survivors." "Sure thing." "Shit! Hollis!" "Shaylee! Shaylee!" Alex yelled. The comm went to dead silence. "Alex, what do we do?" Keeley asked. Alex shook his head. "We keep moving. We'll figure it out once we're done here." The two had finally reached the top floor. The layout of the room they entered was set up like a large flight cockpit. There were controls and panels everywhere. What the hell is all this shit?" Keeley asked. "Soldiers and monsters I can do. My first impulse is to shoot everything in this room. Easy, Keely, just hold on. Alex looked up and down at the control systems. For some reason, something made him want to flip a switch on one of the monitors, so he did. The displays came to life. Alex saw Hollis and Shaley being attacked by the strapped-down creatures and the machinery that was stitching the creatures back together. The cameras kept washing out in brightness with every muzzle flash. Alex looked around for something, anything that would stop them. Then a monitor to his side shut off and then came back on. The next time it flicked on, it was replaced by Jack Newsom's face. "You look like you could use a hand, Alex." "Jack, what the fuck are you doing here?" "Taking in the control system, of course. I'd have a drink if I could. The technology controlling Baruger's experiments is fascinating and horrifying," the old man replied. "Jack, how do I turn them off?" "Off? Just shoot them." "Jack, my friends are dying." There's the passion I miss so much. As odd as it is to say, I was enjoying watching the machines work. They're efficient, if cruel. Anyway, you see that red light? Just below it is a plastic casing. There's a tape in there. Pull it out. Alex looked around and did as he was told. It came out easily. Just as suddenly, the light went out, flickered a few times, then came back on. Alex looked over at the monitor with Shaley and Hollis. They were no longer being attacked. "Alex, they stopped. They all just fell to the ground or back on their tables." That was Hollis's voice. "Did you ID them?" "Some of them are rangers. Others look like civilians. It's like Shaley said. They're being altered." Keely shook her head and looked over at Alex. "Altering them for what? More soldiers?" "Vixer, is it?" Jack spoke from the mono-speaker view screen. "You served with Morrison's Marines. Imagine what he could have accomplished if the gangs, raiders, and refugees had fought together instead of..." Alex lifted his rifle and shot Jack's view screen out. Keely's eyes went wide. "Son of a bitch," he said aloud. "He knew about all this and didn't tell anyone. Baruger could have taken thousands of people and changed them, and this..." Alex held up the tape. "This stupid piece of old tech is what set them to rampage and riot. Baruger doesn't need an army, he just needs time." Jack reappeared on another monitor. "And if the Council refuses to go to war, that is all he will have. Eventually, the other countries will fall under his hidden sphere of influence, whether they want to or not. He'll change them all, and in the end, he'll win." Alex spat off to the side. "Why didn't you put this in your journals? Why didn't you tell anyone?" Jack's image was silent. "Can an AI hesitate?" he thought. "I didn't know, Alex. Being brought back into the world of the machine opened new doors. Allowed me to explore things that my contacts never could have. But even with all that, his intentions are still hidden to me. I know as much as you do." "You're a shitty liar," Keely cut in. "Huh, so I've been told. But here's the truth. That tape controls more than the people here. With the right application, it could be used on Baruger soldiers. Anywhere." Hollis broke in over the comm. "If we want to fight a war, then that doesn't help. His troops don't need to be any more bloodthirsty than they already are." Jack's image shrugged. Alex stared at him for a time. He stood there remembering their conversation in Jerusalem. This was what he had wanted him to find. This was his plan all along, but it meant that the world was going to get much messier than Alex had planned. From afar, Keely saw Alex's expression. At first, she thought he stared at Jack with disgust or anger, but as she paid more attention, she saw it was resignation, and she didn't know why. They had a weapon that could be used against Baruger now, so why the weariness? "We need to destroy this place," Alex finally said. "It's an abomination." "You can't do that, Alex. Your peace would go right out the window," Jack replied. "Leave it and go back to Jerusalem. You have your proof." "Alex, he has a point," Shaley added over the comm. Alex turned back to the view screen of all the bodies. "Look around you. Do you want to end up like that? This shit is the reason I picked up a fucking gun. If you're all okay with leaving it like this, then what the fuck are we even doing here?" The rest of his team was silent. "Australia won't give us their vote unless this place is gone. If we go back to Jerusalem and show them our proof, then they'll wonder why we left this place up. No, we destroy it now. The rest of you get back to the bird. I'll find a way out on my own." "Alex," Vixer said, reaching out with her. "Now, goddammit." Vixer stopped her reach, let her arm down, and turned on her heel. Alex waited until he heard her footsteps on the stairs, and Shaley and Hollis disappear from the view screen. "You wouldn't stand for this," Alex said to the empty room, knowing Jack was hiding somewhere. "No, but I always had a plan. You're letting your rage for Baruger bleed over all of them," Jack replied. "And you let your failures bleed over everyone you came into contact with until they drowned. When you let yourself be captured, you gave up everything for your revenge," Alex spit off to the side. "And look at where that got me. I lost the woman I loved just like you. I lost my best friend just like you. You keep going the way you are, you'll lose your life just like I did," Jack replied. "The difference between you and I, Jack, is that I care about the state I leave the world in and about the people I leave in it. It all started as a revolutionist freedom about doing what is right. No one else is going to pay that cost but me. Baruger will die, and I will burn every fucking thing in my way to do it. And when it's my turn to fall into the fire, I won't wait for the ground to crumble under me. I'll leap." "Then you are the Reaper." "I am what I need to be. Now find the self-destruct sequence and blow this place to hell. You owe me that much." "Very well." The team didn't stick around to watch the explosion. Instead, they made back for Jerusalem. Alex got on the comm with General Woodson. "Well, Velasco, what did you find?" "There was no separatist group. Baruger was capturing your soldiers and civilians and turning them into his augmented soldiers. They were the ones causing your riots, just like you thought. My guess is that he planned to use them to eventually infiltrate your army." "So it was true. Not that I don't believe you, Alex, but do you have any proof?" Woodson asked. "I'm transmitting body cam footage now. Look at the tables. My team estimates that there had to be several other floors with an equal amount of people." The line went dead for a moment. "And you blew up the building. Velasco, could those people have been saved?" "I don't know, General. The only cure I've seen for the augmented is bullets or fire. Trying to save those people would have blown both of our nation's covers." "I understand. And I'm sorry we asked you to do this." "Not as sorry as I am for having seen it, General. Those people are trapped in their own bodies, fully aware of their actions but without the control. Blame Baruger. If I'm to be punished for killing those people, then I'll let history decide what to make of me," Alex replied. The line was silent for a few moments again. "Australia appreciates your aid in this matter, Alexander. You'll have your vote. Off the record, however, you performed a great favor for us. We owe you a debt we can't likely repay." The line was cut before Alex could respond. He knew Woodson was likely upset and would need time to digest the images, but at least they now had proof and attained Sydney's support. But if Baruger had progressed his project in any other nation, he knew that wouldn't be enough. Janet had flown in from New Purgatory specifically for the vote. She thought it would be good to be by Tyrese's side for the occasion, but she hoped Alex's work would be enough. He and his team were late, however, and all Tyrese had received was video footage of a facility that was turning people into augmented. The video itself was marked Sydney, Australia. "He found proof of Baruger's aggression. This is all we need," Janet said. Tyrese shook his head and motioned for her to follow. "Not exactly. They also destroyed the facility without reporting it to the council. Alex claims the Australians asked him to investigate it and do what was necessary to secure their borders." "So what's the problem?" Janet asked. "Australia asked him to do that before they knew there were over 1,000 civilians in there. The general agreed with Alex's assessment that the augmented couldn't be saved, but there are others on the council who may not." "Shit," Janet said. "I told you this would happen, Janet. I honestly hope he doesn't show up on time. He might walk out of that council meeting in chains. We can't let that happen. I'm beyond negotiating with Jerusalem and Berlin at this point. Regardless of all the seats we hold, a crime is still a crime. The other nations won't disregard that. The vote will be the vote. There's no other play." As Tyrese finished his thoughts, the pair approached the dome of rock. "This is it. I'll check the comm one more time and meet you inside," Janet said. Tyrese gave her a nod and made his way in. Janet pressed a finger up to her right ear. "Alex, where are you?" Static cut in over the line at first, before an old, gravelly voice cut in. "He's gonna be late, Trishella." It was Jack's voice. "What the hell happened out there? What did you make him do?" I didn't make him do anything. Alex asked me to destroy the building, so I did. You could have stopped him, Janet replied. He stopped listening to me a long time ago. You know that. We all have roads to walk, Janet. Alex chose his when he decided war was more important than what he was fighting for in the first place. Don't give me that shit. You, of any of us, could have convinced him. Instead, you've twisted him up worse. We're going to lose the vote, and he's going to lose his life, Janet argued. Then you need to keep your distance from him. Don't show the evidence. It's proof of German encroachment. It's also proof that you and the other nations are collaborating with a terrorist. If you present that video footage, all the work you've done will be for nothing. The council will sanction New Purgatory into the ground or worse. Disavow any knowledge of it, Jack replied. You, of all people, would have me hang Alex out to dry? You think he wouldn't do it to you if it meant killing Beruger? I think you've spent too much time thinking about what he didn't do to help you, Janet said. This isn't about me, Janet, but I know firsthand how far he'll go and what he'll sacrifice to get there. I've been there. I ended up there. We all have our choices to make. He made his. Now you need to make yours. The comm cut dead. Janet cursed under her breath and raced for the dome of rock. She needed to get to Tyrese. Fucking thing. She stalled out. The comm is dead. Alex and his team had made it an hour outside of Sydney when he lost flight control of the Silver Angel. He had been able to set the bird down gently, but once they had landed, there was no way to start her back up again. Hollis was standing behind Alex while he was fussing with the controls. This is sabotage. The Australians fucked us, Alex. They had to. We can't survive out here long. Beasts out here will eat us alive. Alex dropped from his seat and onto the floor, going to work getting the panel removed. You know about anything electrical? Hollis asked. Alex turned his head and scowled at Keller. Right. Stupid question. Gonna make sure nothing claws at the hull. Alex looked at the tightly maintained and managed wires. I have no idea what the fuck I'm looking at, he said aloud. From there, Alex proceeded to put his hand on each cable, looking for the slightest fault or tear. We call this meeting of the Jerusalem Council to order, Joseph Bernard said aloud. Today's members presiding over our vote of Berlin's legitimacy to remain neutral are as follows. Ambassador Vale, along with General Trishella of New Purgatory, General Androv of Moscow, Commander-in-Chief Lawson of Sydney, Jens Eberhard of Berlin, Ambassador Yori of Japan, Castor of New Cairo. And I am High Counselor Joseph Bernard of Jerusalem. Now, before we get to business of the vote, is there any new evidence the accusing party would like to bring forward? Tyrese's eyes darted forward towards Lawson, but said nothing himself. Instead, he turned to Janet. He thought she seemed stressed. He could see light beads of sweat on her neck. We have nothing further to add, Janet said. Very well, Bernard continued. Does any other country have evidence they wish to add? Sid Lawson rose his hand, and Janet felt her heart sink. Ambassadors, I would like you to turn your attention to the monitors built into the tables in front of you. Lawson paused as he waited for the other ambassadors' attention to shift to their screens. For a time, Australia has experienced riots and rebellions from our own people. No demands were made. The attacks were senseless acts of violence, but it's important to note that they have only occurred in the last 6 months. At a time frame that Berlin disavowed Dr. Beruger's ties to their government. I had General Woodson conduct a full investigation, which led us to the place appearing on your screens now. Many of the ambassadors visibly cringed at the images they were shown, the bodies of live subjects being cut into, brain matter being replaced with wiring and circuit boards. Those are citizens of Australia being changed. We believe those are the same people who led the senseless assaults and escaped, or were reported as missing in the previous reports we filed with this council. The footage you now see comes from a base in the heart of Sydney, constructed by Germans for research. They, along with the Americans, ensured our survival in the last war, so we were happy to allow them to set up shop. Had we known this would be the result, we would have been spearheading a war against them ourselves, Lawson finished. From the other end of the table, Jens Eberhardt let out a series of chuckles.
If you're done, Lawson, I'd appreciate you stepping off your soapbox to answer this question. Do you believe anyone here finds this hard-hitting yet utterly doctored footage to be real? I, for one, would like to see this facility myself, in person.
Jens makes a good point, Bernard said. While I'm no expert on doctored footage, I too would like to see this place. Lawson shook his head. My soldiers were the ones that found it and destroyed that abomination. The facility is gone. Jen's easygoing expression faded.
You what?
We destroyed that research lab. It was a horror factory. Call it an act of war if you want. We're more than willing to shed blood for what you did to our people. That should be all the proof you need. Janet was finally able to exhale. Australia was taking the blame, which cleared Alex's name. Joseph Bernard was shaking his head. Lawson, your people's aggression towards a guest in your country will be addressed, but that is not the purpose of this meeting. Without any hard evidence, your nation itself may well endure war. Enough of this whitewash, General Androv said. This comes as no surprise. Berlin attacked New Purgatory with these same types of automatons. Australia was justified in its retribution, as would any of us be. This is just one more black mark against their nation. Yet you, of all people, Bernard, want to whisk it away as Australian aggression? How many more acts of violence need to happen before you see the enemy sitting beside you at this table?
That is a powerful speech coming from a nation that abducted our scientists to create the same automatons, as you put it, and failed. Save for the one man who has sought asylum within our government. Rest assured, Androv, your crimes will be uncovered as well,
Jens replied. You're quick to provide asylum to a known murderer and traitor, Castor spat.
You're not one to talk. Both your nation and Japan hitched their wagons to a known terrorist organization. Regardless of what the council believes, that is fact, and you have all prospered from it,
Eberhard answered. Enough, Bernard yelled. Everyone's personal feelings have made their appearance for the day. This council was created for democracy. I would not see it dissolve into anarchy over petty insults and half-truths. Jens, does your nation have any evidence to put forward regarding their innocence?
Only that 2 bases in the last month have been destroyed with no real explanation or reason. The first in the UK, where we were providing aid to refugees in Newcastle. Now our research center in Sydney. It doesn't take a genius to do the math. There's only one man that has had a strong enough vendetta against us that could accomplish what has been done so far. The only man who is brazen enough to attack us during a truce. A man who isn't here. Perhaps his flight from Oceania has been delayed.
Bernard nodded at Eberhard and looked at Tyrese and Janet. Where is Alexander Velasco? I doubt he missed this meeting intentionally. Though he is a soldier, he has played the political game well up until now. He, along with his team, disappeared aboard their Hellchopper last night. We don't know where he went, but since the events of 6 months ago, he's been prone to these kinds of departures. Those, which you'll note, aren't sequential with the destruction of German bases, Tyrese answered.
Convenient,
Jen said. He isn't the man he once was, but people change when their loved ones are taken away from them and nothing is done about it, Janet spoke up. That's why I'm here, and I wish Alex could be too, but he is broken, and the same man Beruger harbors is the man that killed Layla Lansfield. You're lucky Alex isn't here, Jens. Knowing what he knows about you and your people, what you did to the civilians of New Purgatory, how you fronted the slavery project China ran, he wouldn't let you leave this room alive.
Are you threatening me, General?
Jens asked. I don't have to threaten you, Ambassador Eberhard. Beruger already has one foot in the grave, and everyone at this table knows it. I only hope I get to be there when you realize you have no more friends, no more allies, no more slaves. I believe you've made your point, General Trusella, Bernard said. Very well. This meeting has opened current issues we will eventually have to address, but let us proceed to the vote. Ambassador Vale, on the matter of armed conflict on the nation of Berlin, how do you vote? Tyrese did not hesitate, nor did he take his eyes off Eberhard. Aye. General Androv? Yes. Ambassador Yori? Aye. Castor? Yes. As Berlin is being judged, it has no vote. We move to Commander-in-Chief Sid Lawson. Lawson had his head down, staring at his hands. He had lied and lied well. Saving Alexander was a price he had to pay for Alexander saving his own people. Still, there was trepidation at sending all the nations into war again. The last great war had destroyed the world, and this time there would be no savior technology to protect the world's people. He looked up at Janet, not in an intimidating manner, but morose. He had hoped that he would not have to preside over more war. Janet stared back at him, but she could tell he was looking through her, not at her. Lawson turned back towards Bernard. Yes. Bernard nodded. That leaves our nation, though I would direct you to the monitors in front of you. Janet's heart stopped. Video footage. Only this time it showed Alexander and his team assaulting German soldiers in an unknown location. Then the images winked away to show new ones. This time it was Alex in Newcastle at another German base. One of his team members was rigging it to explode. The Mossad are good at what they do, and believe me, if we had any evidence linking New Purgatory or Australia, this conversation would have a very different tone, Bernard said. While we have no direct evidence that the initial footage is of Velasco's team in Australia, the timing is certainly suspect. It is possible Lawson is lying for Velasco, but with General Trischella's word, it seems he and his team are acting of their own accord. And without knowing what was in those locations, this is a violation of the truce established by this council. Because of this information, I will not be held responsible for a war against a founding nation when the evidence clearly points to aggression from a rogue terrorist. Jerusalem votes nay. The resolution against Berlin fails. Janet looked around the table at all the angry faces, but her heart dropped to her stomach. It was over. Ruined. Beruger would get the time he needed to recover, and he would begin to abduct and destroy the other nations until they had no choice but to bend their knee to him. In light of this new evidence, we have two responsibilities. The first is to put Alexander Velasco back on our list of known terrorists. Any nation found dealing with him will face harsh sanctions and possible conflict. As a show of good faith, I recommend New Purgatory cast the first vote, if only to prove your nation had no connection with these attacks. Janet felt like her head and body were disconnected from each other. Violently ill was the only way to describe the churning in her stomach. So lightheaded, she couldn't read any of the other members at the table. If she didn't vote yes, the war could shift to New Purgatory, a war the city could never win alone. Tyrese made the decision for her. He slowly raised his hand while looking at the other members who had just voted in his favor not 5 minutes ago, and nodded. The others, though hesitantly, did the same. None as excited as Jen Zeberhart. Very well, Bernard announced. The resolution passes. Alexander Velasco and the members of his Sentinels are henceforth labeled as terrorists. Any attempts to aid them or shelter them will result in assessment by this council.
Bernard, Berlin has a formal request of this council as an addendum to the measure you just put forward. Despite the lies we have heard here today, we have little in the way of armed forces. When Velasco discovers he has his back to a wall, he will lash out. We believe he will attack the heart of Berlin and go after not only myself but also Dr. Beruger and anyone else who stands in his way. We request military forces from each of the council nations as a safeguard.
Bernard looked at Eberhard incredulously. A peacekeeping force for a small team. A platoon would serve you just as well.
With respect, Joseph, this is the same man that brought down the tower and an entire army with 11 people. Since we have no real defenses, we would prefer to not take that chance and would see this as another show of good faith.
Bernard let out a long sigh. As a member of this council, you have the right to defense without need of a vote. I trust I do not have to remind my fellow councilors of their responsibilities. No one said a word, but Bernard saw the disgust written on all their faces. Very well. This meeting is adjourned. Janet sat at the table alone long after the other counselors had left. What the fuck just happened? She thought. It was a stupid question. They, the city, had been screwed over by politics, just like Janet knew would happen one day. But this was worse than war coming back to New Purgatory. That would come in time, she was sure, but having to aid Beruger against Alex? She hadn't seen that coming. He needed to be warned. Janet made for the exit of the dome of rock, fiddling with her comm until she found the right channel. Tell me you heard all of that, she said. Calm down, Janet. Have a gun, a cigarette, Jack's voice said. Janet sat down on the steps leading up to the monument. Regular people, none the wiser about the machinations of government, went on with the day. As Janet poked a cig between her lips, she wished, just for a moment, she was as oblivious as they were. I need a secure channel to Alex. Is his bird back up in the air? It will be after our chat. You see now why I delayed him? This was inevitable. So you knew. I know a lot. The trick is how you play around it, Jack replied. Okay, Janet said. How are we going to do that? You're going to tell Alex what happened, and then follow your orders from the council. That's a real shit plan. Have a little faith. You're asking me to tell Alex that I'm going to turn on him, Janet said. I'm asking you to do as you always have. Believe in him. Your channel's open. Alex pulled his body from the bulkhead when he heard the engines rumble back to life. What the hell? There was a clicking in Alex's ear, a comm call. Alex? Alex, this is Janet. I hear you, Janet. We're going to be a little late to the war. Mechanical trouble. Alex, you need to listen to me. There is no war. Jerusalem, the counselor, had footage of you and your team. They used it to stop your vote. They've also marked you and your team as terrorists. The line went dead from Janet's end, though she could hear faint breathing from the other end of the line. Eberhardt claimed the research was doctored, but the footage of your team shooting down their soldiers was clear as day. It gets worse. If anyone is caught aiding you, they will be considered hostile. You took a risk contacting me then. Alex, you're my friend. You're also our leader no matter what these assholes say. They want armies in Berlin from every nation. I won't do it. Council be damned. If you're going to do what I think you're going to do, then I'm standing by your side. Janet waited for Alex's reply, but there was another pause on the line. This had all gone to shit, all of it. She felt for her friend. He had plotted and connived his way into the politician's game, and it had all blown back in the wrong direction. No, Janet, not this time. There's too much at stake. Alex, we're the only 2 Crusaders left. You can't do this alone, especially not with a team that small. You need my help. The last of the Crusaders. Well, apart from Mikhail, and he won't be around much longer, Alex mused. I don't know how or why this happened, Alex. New Purgatory has come so far in such a short time. We have a fully functional army. People are living in homes instead of huts and shanties, Janet trailed. That's why you can't go with me, Janet. For all the bullshit we've been through. Being back in the air again, doing the things we did to get this far. It's reminded me of why I started fighting to begin with. I do this so no one else will see their friends die in front of them. For a cause about basic human rights. As much as I want you to come with me, I won't become Jack Newsom. I won't burn my friends and all they've built just to kill one man. I've already learned that lesson. That's why I gotta do this alone. Janet exhaled a small laugh. I'll never forgive you for putting me in charge of this shit, you know that? The best way to make the Defiant respect authority is to make them the authority. I'd say you did pretty damn well, Alex replied. Then I'm not about to see all our work end. But what happens if I'm there and I see you and your team? What then? Janet asked. Alex played with the flight controls and tapped his finger on the control board a few times. It was a real possibility, not just for Janet, but for Castor, or General Androv, or even Talia's father. If it all goes right, you won't have to do a damn thing. And if it doesn't, we'll make it up as we go along. Just like the prison raid. Just like the tower. Either way, this might be the last time we talk to each other, he said. Janet hadn't cried since Elias died a year ago, and before that when she had been told her father was killed. But now she could feel that unfamiliar dampness on her cheeks. Well, whatever happens, Alex, I'm glad Jack brought me through those doors a year ago. Good luck. The comm went dead. All Janet could hear now was static. The end was coming, and she needed to prepare. As Alex lifted the bird up into the air, he relayed the news to his team. They seemed to take it in stride, but it wasn't as if they had any say in the matter. The time for doubts was over. Alex set a course for New Purgatory, for home a final time. He and his team would try to keep a low profile while they resupplied before hitting Berlin. As the autopilot took over, Alex remembered what Janet had said. "I'm glad Jack brought me through those doors." He was too, because there was no way his plan could be pulled off without her.